Sometimes, the most memorable stories are not those that ended with happy endings, but those that, even in the face of all adversity, chose to continue existing, even if only in the silence of a memory, in the pages of a letter, or in the memory of a heart that never forgot. This is one of those stories. A love that was born in times of peace, but that had to learn to survive amidst the cries of war. A love separated by distance, pain, uncertainty, but that never stopped living, because it found its refuge in words, and on paper, its eternity. The setting is Europe devastated by the relentless winds of World War II. Sirens that echo in the distance, letters stained with dirt and gunpowder, hearts that beat with fear and hope at the same time. It was a time when every day could be the last, when the kisses were rushed and the hugs were too long, as if they wanted to stop time. And it was in this context that two souls met and decided that, no matter what happened, they would not lose each other, not while there was still paper, ink, and living feelings. He was sweet, firm, with an intense look. He lived with his feet on the ground, but his heart in the clouds. He, a young dreamer, brave, but afraid of leaving behind something more than his homeland. They fell in love like someone who knows that time is the enemy, fast, voracious, cruel. And maybe that's why everything happened so intensely. Every word spoken, every touch, every promise whispered in the ear tasted like eternity. They knew that war was coming, but they chose to live that love, even if it was for a short time. When the summons came, reality knocked on the door with the force of thunder. The train left at dawn. There was no time for farewell parties or future plans. Just one last kiss, one last exchange of glances, and a certainty that the distance would not be enough to kill what was between them. Before leaving, he promised to write. He promised to tell everything, how the days were going, how his heart felt. He promised that even in the mud of the trenches, his thoughts would always be with her. And she promised to wait. He promised to keep each letter as if it were a part of his return home. And so began the story you are about to learn. A story written not with happy endings, but with deep truths. Written with pain, longing, but also with faith. Faith that love can cross continents, survive time, win wars. This is not a story of military victories, nor of decorated heroes. It is the story of two hearts that refused to give up. Of a love that, even without contact, blossomed in every word sent. Of letters that not only informed, but also healed. That it is not only updated, but that it is sustained. You will read about silences that screamed, about goodbyes that were never accepted, about reunions that only happened on paper. You will feel the pain of those who waited for news for months. You will discover what it means to love someone you can't touch, but who lives inside you as if he were next to you. You will understand that there are loves that do not need presence to be real, because they are already eternal from the first, I love you. Today, only the letters remain, yellowed by time, folded with care, with letters that shake more than any bombardment. They don't just talk about war, they talk about dreams, plans, and shared secrets. They are silent witnesses of a love that chose to resist, who refused to die. And that is why this story needs to be told, because as long as there is someone who reads these words, that love will continue to live. Because paper, despite being fragile, has immense strength, the strength of memory, and no bomb, no army, no distance is capable of erasing what was written with the soul. So, get ready to go back in time. Walking through ruined streets and through memories that are still alive. Discover that even when all seems lost, love finds a way to continue. Not always in the way we imagine, but always the way that matters. This is the beginning of the story of a love separated by war, but that lived forever on paper. Every great love story begins with a moment that, at first glance, seems everyday. A crossed look, a shy smile, a simple gesture. But in that moment, something silently changes. And after that, nothing will be the same again. This is exactly how the love between Nikolai and Elena began. An ordinary day, an afternoon when the world still seemed at peace, even with the storm of war already gathering on the horizon. Elena worked in a small bookstore in the city, hidden in a narrow street where the steps seemed slower and the time kinder. She loved that place. It was as if each book had a soul, and she, with all the love in the world, took care of each one. His hands knew the weight of a story, and his eyes were trained to find beauty in even the most worn covers. That day, Like so many others, she was organizing shelves, lost in her own thoughts, when she heard the doorbell ring. It was Black Nicholas. He was wearing a simple coat. He carried with him a cold smell and a curious look. He entered as if seeking shelter, or perhaps something else. Elena noticed it at a glance, without imagining that this would be the beginning of everything. He walked to the section of old letters and novels, as if guided by something beyond reason. And then, by chance or by destiny, their eyes met. It was an instant, brief, but full of everything that would come later. "Do you like cards?" he asked with a contained smile. "I like real stories," he responded, "and I don't think anyone lies in a letter." The answer was recorded in his memory like a seed, a thought that would germinate days later when he returned, and he came back again. "Sometimes I would just look at the books, other times I would buy one," but he always exchanged a few words with her, and with each conversation, there was less silence between them. Nikolai was different from the rest of the young people in the city. He had a deep look, like that of someone who had already seen more than he should. Maybe it was the coming war. Perhaps it was the rare sensitivity of someone who feels that time is slipping through their fingers. He spoke calmly and carefully, and when he looked at Elena, it was like he was reading a page too important to turn quickly. As the days passed, the meetings became part of the routine. He would arrive late in the afternoon and she was already waiting. They never agreed on anything. It wasn't necessary. It was as if their internal clocks were adjusting to each other. They began walking through the city together, talking about everything: books, music, fear, hope. They talked about the world, and, without realizing it, they were building a world of their own, where war had not yet entered. One night, while walking along the riverbank, Nikolai stopped, looked at Elena and said, "If one day I have to leave, will you promise me that you will keep our memories like letters?" She didn't quite understand, or he understood it, but preferred to pretend he didn't. The war was a topic that hung in the air like a cloud about to collapse, but neither of them wanted to talk about it yet. That night ended with a kiss, the first, and, with it, the certainty that love was already there, growing among the unspoken words. In the following days they lived intensely. Each moment had the weight of eternity: his laughter, his care, the shared silences, the persistent touches. It was a young but mature love, born of urgency, but full of depth. They knew that they had no guarantees, and perhaps that is why they gave themselves without reservation. For others, perhaps they were simply two young lovers who had a brief romance, but for them it was more. It was something that couldn't be explained, it could only be felt, and they regretted it. They felt as if they had found what everyone seeks, but few find: someone with whom the soul recognizes itself. The first look, that day in the bookstore, was no longer just a memory. It was the starting point of a story that would not be limited to meetings. It would have to be written down, word by word, page by page, even when physical presence was no longer possible. And that's how it all began. With a look, with the silent promise that, no matter what, they would meet on paper, because paper, unlike life, does not fade with time. Their love grew like a delicate flame protected by their hands. Each encounter was an attempt to forget what was coming, a kind of sweet denial, as if the outside world could not invade the silent and intense universe they had built together. But war, as always, does not ask for permission. It enters through the most closed doors, breaks promises, destroys routines, and forces even the purest love to learn to survive without soil. That morning, his world changed. It was spring and the sun seemed to have returned after days of hiding. Elena arrived at the bookstore early. As always, she placed fresh flowers on the counter and arranged the books with her usual care. He didn't expect this to be one of the most memorable days of his life. The city was already murmuring about the progress of the conflict, about sending new troops to the front, but clung to the hope that there was still time. Time to love, to make plans, to live without rushing. That's when Nikolai entered, quieter than usual. He carried something in his eyes she had never seen before, a silent fear, a suppressed sadness. I didn't need to say anything. Elena knew immediately. The summons letter had arrived. It was in his coat pocket, folded carefully, as if he wanted to prevent the war from escaping that paper and taking what was his. He walked towards her with slow steps. He stopped, picked up the letter, and held it out with trembling hands. He read silently, trying to maintain his composure, but the words felt as heavy as if they were made of lead. It was official. He was leaving. After 3 days, there were no screams. There was no overt desperation, just the sound of the world collapsing inside. Elena took a deep breath and looked at Nikolai. In his eyes, there was not only fear for what was to come, but also immense guilt for having left her, as if it was your decision to leave, as if loving and fighting for your country were two opposite paths. She took his hand, squeezed it tightly, and said, "You will come back, and until you do, I will write to you every day, if necessary." It was the first promise made under the shadow of war, a promise that he would fulfill with devotion, as if each written word were a thread that kept them connected. The next 3 days passed as if time had sped up. They tried to live every moment as if it were their last. They walked through the streets where they met. They laughed with the melancholy of someone who already misses them before leaving, and they cried when no one was looking at them. The war transformed everything. Even the simplest touch carried urgency. Even the silence spoke volumes. The night before leaving, Nikolai took Elena to the riverbank, the same one where they had shared their first kiss. They sat next to each other, not speaking for a long time. The sky was clear, and the sound of water was the only thing that could be heard. He then took out a small box from his pocket. Inside, a simple silver ring. He had made no formal requests or promises. He just looked at her and said, "If war takes everything from me, at least I want you to know that what we built was real, more real than anything else. Take it with you, and write to me, please. Write as if we were still here." She accepted the ring, not as a symbol of possession or an interrupted marriage, but as a silent pact, to love even without presence, to remain even without a guarantee of return. On the day of departure, the station was full of uniformed men and tears that no one could contain. It was a sad ritual that was repeated. Throughout the city, sons, husbands, brothers, who left with their eyes turned back, trying to keep the faces of their loved ones for a second longer. Elena saw Nikolai enter the train with firm steps, but her gaze was lost. He greeted, and in that wave there was everything: an apology, a vow of love, a goodbye suffocated by the crowd. When the train left, carrying the love of her life to an uncertain destination, she did not cry. He simply held the ring to his chest and murmured, "Come back to me, or at least write to me." Thus the war separated them. There is no choice, there is no explanation, only with the brutality of the weather and the coldness of the uniforms. But there, in Elena's heart and in Nikolai's hands, the certainty was born that, even separated, they could remain together, because his love had already found a new home. Paper. The train had left. The sound of the whistle still echoed in Elena's head. Days later, as if time refused to pass, the city seemed quieter, emptier, grayer, and his heart felt too heavy for his body to bear. Nikolai was gone. It was far away, in a place where bombs spoke louder than dreams. But before disappearing into the smoke of the station, he had left a promise that he would write, and he wrote. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later. The envelope was crumpled, dirty with dirt, but when Elena received it, she treated it as if it were carrying a piece of life. He sat at the foot of the bed, with trembling hands, and opened the envelope with the delicacy of someone opening a sacred gift. The words, written in firm but hasty handwriting, read, "Helena, me, I write as if you were by my side right now, as if I could still see your smile hidden behind a book and feel the warmth of your hands in mine. Here the days are long and the nights even longer, but your memory warms me. Writing to you keeps me whole. I promised I would write, and I will, always. With love, Nicholas." That night he read the letter dozens of times. She memorized every line, as if she could, for a moment, be close to him again. His words seemed to have smell, weight, texture. It was as if love took shape and traveled miles inside an envelope. From that day on, writing became a ritual for Elena. In the morning, before opening the bookstore, he would sit at the table with paper and ink, and let his heart pour out into words. He wrote about the weather, about the bookstore, about the flowers he liked. But he also wrote about pain, about fear, about absence. He didn't hide anything, because he knew that, even far away, he needed to feel like they were still together, even in different worlds. Every letter sent was like a prayer, every response received, a blessing. Nikolai wrote whenever he could. Sometimes it took weeks for his words to reach her, and when they arrived, They did so with the smell of war, but also with the hope of those who fight for a greater reason. He talked about his companions, about the long walks, about the lack of sleep, but he never stopped writing about her, about how he missed the sound of her voice, how he could still see her in his dreams, and how, even surrounded by so much chaos, her memory was the safest refuge there was. You are my home, Elena. No matter where I am, it's you I think of again. Always right. Your words make me breathe through the smoke. Over time, the letters became more than just exchanges of feelings. They became anchors. They were bridges built over an abyss called war. Nikolai wrote in the breaks between battles, sometimes with wounded hands, sometimes with teary eyes. And Elena, on the other side, felt every line like a sign of life. It was as if, as long as there were letters, there was hope. And there was something magical about that habit. The letters not only spoke of the pain of distance, but also of pure love. Without the distraction of physical presence, without the relief of a hug or the comfort of a touch, all that was left was the word, and it was there where the two took refuge. In words, they built a house. By writing, they kept their hearts beating. As the months passed, Elena's box became full. Each letter was carefully kept, wrapped in a scented handkerchief, as if it were a treasure. And so it was. Those pieces of paper were all I had of him, and at the same time, they were more than enough to keep him alive in his life. Sometimes, when the nostalgia got worse, I would reread them all at once, and he cried. I cried for him, for her, for what they lost. But most of all, I cried for what they kept alive, despite everything, because every word written was proof that love could last. The letters became a diary shared between two different worlds, one where bombs exploded and another where time seemed frozen in wait. And between these two worlds, an invisible line united them. Paper, the words, the love. This is how, although they were separated, Elena and Nikolai remained together, because they found in the letters not only comfort, but existence. While they were writing, they were alive. As they read, they were present. While they waited for the next letter, they were united by an invisible but unbreakable thread. A thread called love. If you have come this far, it is because you felt something. Because, in some way, this story touched you. And that's exactly why I want to invite you to be a part of it. Leave your like now. This shows that this type of content deserves to continue existing. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapter of this and other stories that come from the heart and stand the test of time. Nikolai and Elena's journey is just beginning. In the next section, you will discover what it is like to experience love in completely different worlds. Him on the front lines. Her in a city that only knows how to wait. A love sustained by letters, faith and longing. You can't leave now. Stay with me, because what comes next will shake you even more. Let's go together to the end of this story. While Nikolai's life was marked by the noise of gunshots, by shouted orders in the midst of the confusion of the battlefields, and by the weight of a backpack that carried not only equipment, but also memories, desires, and fears, Elena's life unfolded in a deafening silence. They lived in such different worlds that if it weren't for the letters, it would seem impossible that they were still together. But they belonged, even without seeing each other, even without knowing when or if they would meet again. On the front, every day was a mystery. Nikolai woke up to the smell of wet earth mixed with sweat and gun oil. He slept when he could, with his head resting on sandbags, surrounded by noises that reminded him all the time that death could be just a few meters away. It was an environment where life was worth little, where one wrong step could be the last, and where many men stopped being who they were to become shadows of what they once were. But Nikolai resisted, and he resisted for her. Each letter from Elena was like a spark of light in the middle of the darkness. He read them secretly, often several times a day, folding them carefully and holding them close to his chest, like an amulet. His voice echoed in his mind as he walked through rubble, while he carried a wounded comrade, while he looked at the sky trying to remember the time when there were no bombs. She was his sanity in a world gone mad. It was his house, your refuge, your love. Oh. The other side, Elena waited in silence. The city continued its routine, but for her everything had stopped. The bookstore continued to operate. People continued to buy books, but she no longer smiled like before. I spent my days waiting for a letter, any letter, that said, "I'm still here." Sometimes she would spend hours staring at the window, listening to the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk, waiting for one of them to stop at her door with an envelope in their hands. He tried to some normality. He made coffee, read his favorite passages from books, and wrote diligently. But now everything was filtered by absence. Every written word was an attempt to stay connected to him, and every second without a response was a torture made of silence and assumptions. Was he still okay? Were the letters arriving? Did he still love her? And it is in this contrast where the weight of this story is built. While Nikolai got used to the smell of gunpowder, Elena faced the emptiness of a room where no one else sat. While he faced the fear of death, she faced the fear of oblivion. Their world was divided not only by geographical distance, but also by the brutal difference in the realities they inhabited. But there was something that kept them going, the invisible bond they created through words. It was as if, by writing, they both created a kind of parallel universe, where they could still touch each other. They could still laugh. They could still exist as before. It was in this world where they took refuge. Nikolai wrote about what he saw, but he always turned everything into poetry. He talked about the stars over the camp, about the songs whispered by the soldiers at the end of the night, about the memories he had of her perfume. I avoided telling the deepest horrors, not out of shame, but out of protection. He didn't want her to carry the weight of what he carried every day. And Elena, in turn, also wrote, trying to paint life with softer colors. He told her about children playing in the square, about funny customers in the bookstore, about how the sky seemed more beautiful to him when he thought about it. It was his way of giving her peace, even if it was momentary. Even in the midst of waiting, she wanted to be a light, even though she was often immersed in darkness. This constant exchange of letters was what prevented each one from getting lost in their own world. She gave him the reason to continue. He made her believe that it was still worth waiting. And so the days passed, so different in everything, except what mattered most, love. It was a love that didn't need touches, but memories, who did not live on empty promises, but on words full of truth. A love that learned to survive in two completely opposite worlds, and yet remained firm, separated by war, but united by letters, separated by time, but connected by something greater. They lived different realities, yes, but with every heartbeat and every line written, they showed that true love is not measured by closeness, but by the ability to endure, even when everything around us says it won't work. For those who are far from those they love, time does not pass. Wait, each minute lengthens as if it were a thread about to break. But, for those waiting for a letter from the war, time not only takes its toll, it hurts, and silence ... Silence becomes a kind of invisible enemy, which sneaks into the heart, sowing doubts, fears, and anxieties that do not always have a name. That's what happened to Elena. Nikolai's letters always arrived at irregular intervals, sometimes in 2 or 3 days, others a week. He had become accustomed to the unpredictability of military mail, the blurry postmarks and delays caused by closures. But this time, something was different. The days began to pass. 10, 15, 20 days ... and nothing. The fear started out subtle, almost silent. First, she tried to convince herself that it was just a delay. Maybe the post office was jammed. Maybe it was on the move, being transferred. Maybe I was just too tired to write. She looked for rational explanations, but the heart does not understand logic. Every morning, Elena went to the mailbox with her heart racing. Every afternoon, he returned inside with his eyes downcast, as if he were carrying another brick of anguish on his back. The silence was not just the absence of paper and ink. It was his absence, the absence of signs of life. And, little by little, the silence became deafening. He continued writing every day, as he had promised, even without knowing if I was receiving it, even without knowing if he was still alive. His lyrics began to change. The tone, previously light, took on more intimate and desperate contours. She talked about the fear, the longing she felt, about the nights she dreamed about him and woke up crying. Nikolai, please, tell me you're still there. Tell me you're reading this, that you still think about me like I think about you every second. The silence is what hurts the most. It makes me imagine the worst. Elena could no longer concentrate in the bookstore. Customers noticed his distant look, his trembling hands, his lower voice. Friends tried to console her by telling her that everything would be fine, but no words from outside had the strength he needed. Only one voice could calm her, hers, and that voice remained silent. Meanwhile, on the front, Nikolai was also facing his own silent war. During that period, its troops had been deployed in one of the most dangerous regions of the conflict. The cold was biting, the fighting was more intense, and the conditions for writing were almost non-existent. Still, he tried. He even wrote 3 letters. 2 were lost in a bombing raid, and the third, sent in haste, took almost a month to be published. Nikolai suffered inside as he imagined Elena waiting for him. Without responding, perhaps thinking that he had left without even saying goodbye, he wrote with the urgency of someone fighting against oblivion. Elena, me, forgive my silence. He was never absent. I was scared. He was survival. I'm here. Hurt. Yes, but I live. And with a heart full of you. I missed you like I was out of breath. Please don't let silence end what we have built. Because even without paper or pen, I continued to write you inside me, every day. When this letter arrived, Elena burst into tears. He read it aloud as if hearing her voice for the first time in months. It was like breathing again, as if the soul, which was slowly drowning, could finally come to the surface and fill its lungs with hope. That day he understood that silence does not always mean abandonment. That, sometimes, is just the sound of war trying to erase what love insists on keeping alive. And he also understood that letters are not just communication. They are ropes pulled between 2 abysses. They are anchors. They are resistance. After that letter, Elena smiled again, although less strongly. He continued writing, now, with more hope. And Nikolai, despite the difficulties, never stopped writing for so long. They both knew that silence was too dangerous, because in it, thoughts create monsters and feelings wear out. The silence was a test, a hard, cruel, but necessary test, and they overcame it with what always sustained them, the word, because love can resist distance, pain, time, but to survive the silence it needs to scream, and that's what they did. They screamed through the letters, and they listened to each other, even with the war trying to stay silent. Some words have the power to stop time, cross your chest and touch a part of your soul that no one else can reach. And sometimes they don't come with grand statements or rehearsed phrases, but with the brute force of truth, handwritten by someone who only has one certainty, that they love. That's exactly how it came. The letter that changed everything. Elena had returned to her routine, although that word seemed strange to someone who lived between the pain of absence and the hope of returning. But he had found some rhythm again. I wrote daily, read and reread all the previous letters. He kept each envelope as if it were a locket, until, one cold autumn morning, he saw the postman approaching with a different envelope. It was thicker, with Nikolai's handwriting a little shakier, more slanted. It didn't seem like just another letter. It felt like a rant, and so it was. Elena held the envelope for long minutes before opening it. I was afraid. I didn't know what was there. Maybe a goodbye, maybe bad news, but there was also an intuition, that feeling that something profound was about to happen. When he opened it, he found not one, but 2 folded sheets, full to the end. The first sentence already made it clear that it was not a letter like the others. If this is the last letter you receive from me, I want you to know everything. She held her breath. He sat down. He read each word with the concentration of someone facing a revelation. Elena, I tried to be strong. I tried to spare you what I have seen and experienced here. But what I feel for you has grown so much that it no longer fits inside me. And keeping that would be a crime against everything we have built. I don't know what will become of me tomorrow. The truth is that here every day smells like goodbye. But if I'm going to leave, I want to do it with a clean heart and with the certainty that you know, down to the last detail, what you are. Me. Elena read the letter with teary eyes. He described moments lived, but also moments dreamed of. She talked about a small house in the country, about her own library, about children running around the room while she read, and he wrote, dreams that may never come true, but came to life on paper. I close my eyes and I see you in every detail of this life that we have not yet lived. You are with me in every silence, in every step, in every night when I think I won't be able to bear it. If I don't come back, I want you to follow me. But if you come back, I want you to know. I want everything with you, every moment, every laugh, every tear, every new beginning. It was the first time he spoke so clearly about what he felt. Until then there was a lot of understanding. Love, yes, but contained, protected, as if the fear of losing her prevented him from giving everything. But now, faced with the real possibility of the end, he spared nothing. "You saved me, not once, but dozens of times. In the midst of war, the world goes dark, but every letter from you is like a lit candle. And now, if there's one thing I need to say before it's all over, it's I love you, in a way that no war can erase." Elena cried for hours. It was not a farewell letter, it was a confession letter, a declaration, an emotional testimony. Everything she had wanted to hear, he had finally said, perhaps because, for the first time, he felt that he might not have time to say it anymore. That night, he wrote a response he had never written before, and he placed at the beginning of the letter a phrase that he had never dared to include in the previous ones. "I love you too, and if you come back, I'll be here, with everything we have, and everything we still lack." That letter changed everything because, from then on, there was no more between the lines. There were no more silences carrying feelings. Now everything was exposed, declared, naked before the fragility of life. They were separated, yes, but something greater than distance or fear united them. They were united by a said love, named, reaffirmed. From then on, each letter became different, more free, more intense, more alive. It was as if that truth had freed them both to love more courageously. Because when you love in times of war, there is no time to hide. The letter that changed everything was not the longest, nor the best written, but he was the most sincere. It was the moment when love stopped being just desire, hope, or longing and became a choice. Choose to continue, choose to believe, choose to resist. And sometimes, all a love needs to survive ... is to finally say it. War changes men, no matter how sweet the soul, how pure the heart. No human being emerges unscathed from a scenario where life and death look each other in the eye every day. Nikolai survived the war, but a part of him remained buried in the fields where he fought, in the faces of the friends he saw leave. At night he screamed silently, and although he returned home, he was never the same again. The day of his return should have been the happiest of Elena's life. For months he dreamed of that moment. I imagined running towards him at the station, throwing myself into his arms, smelling him, hearing his voice without needing the mediation of paper. He had fantasized about the scene 1,000 times. She was dressed in blue, the way he liked it. He was smiling, with his backpack on his back, the most recent letter still in his pocket, as always. But when she saw him get off the train, her eyes did not meet the same man who left. Nikolai was thinner. His gaze was distant, as if he was still observing trenches right in front of the open field. He had a tired expression that not only came from his body, but from his soul. Elena ran towards him, hugged him with all the strength she had saved for so long, and he responded, but with a hesitant grip, like someone who was afraid of breaking something inside him. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. He just whispered, "I came back," but it was half true. He returned physically, yes, but the man she knew, whom she loved on light afternoons in the bookstore and on evening walks, was hurt in ways she couldn't see. It was as if something inside him had gone silent forever. For the first few days, Nikolai barely spoke. I spent hours looking out the window, as if I was still waiting for a siren, a call, a gunshot. He slept little, and, when he did sleep, he murmured names, disconnected phrases, and relived scenes that haunted him. Elena tried to approach him gently. She made tea, read aloud extracts from the letters he had written to her, and played soft music at the end of the afternoon. But it took a while to allow him to enter that new inner world that had been carved with blood and fire. The war had left marks on his body, a deep scar on his shoulder, his walking a little slower, but the most painful marks were in the silences, in the pauses, between one sentence and another, in the absence of a smile, in the way he avoided looking people in the eye for too long. One night he finally spoke. "I saw things that no one should see. Elena, I've done things I'm not proud of. I carry names that never return. I carry promises that I couldn't keep. When I look in the mirror, I see a stranger, and I wonder, do you still love me, even so?" She cried, not because her love had changed, but because it hurt her to see the man she loved wondering if he was still worthy of love. She sat next to him, took his hand gently and answered, "It's not the same Nikolai who left, and I'm not the same Elena anymore either. But if we are here, if we still have each other, it is because that love survived, even hurt, even silent, and I love you. Yes, I even love the parts you hide, because they are the ones who prove that you fought, that you came back, that you were still here. From that night on, Nikolai began to allow himself to feel again. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy. There were relapses, silences, dark days. But little by little, Elena saw how the shine returned to his eyes. It is not the same as before, but a new brightness, born of pain, of survival, of the certainty that love, even when hurt, can be a home. He started writing again, not like before, with paper and envelope, but in little notes left around the house. Short poems, single phrases, as if he still used words as a way to rebuild himself. She kept them all. He knew that each sentence was a brick in the bridge that connected them to each other. Nikolai was never the same again, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing, because true love is not that which loves only what is beautiful and intact. He is the one who chooses to remain equal before the pieces, who sees wounds as signs of bravery, that embraces the shadows along with the light. And Elena loved this new Nikolai, not despite the brands, but thanks to them, because they told a story. The story of a man who faced hell and came back, a man who, although broken, still loved, a man who, even transformed, was still hers, and that, was enough. Sometimes, love doesn't end, it just fades into silence, in something that remains there, floating between two people who love each other deeply, but who no longer find the same space to exist as before. This is exactly what happened to Elena and Nikolai. After the war, after all the letters exchanged, after the reunion, what came was not a fairy tale happy ending, but a cruel, mature and silent decision to let the other go. Not for lack of love, but too much for love. The first months of coexistence after returning were a brave attempt at reconstruction. Nikolai strived to be the man Elena deserved, and she, in turn, did her best to accept the pain he caused her. But there was something there, an invisible barrier, something that prevented that reunion from blossoming, as both had dreamed of. Nikolai carried not only trauma, but also a consuming guilt. He felt like he had left too many parts of himself scattered along the way, that he had become a specter, someone who existed, but could no longer fully inhabit the love that had once united them. Despite all his attempts, he felt like he was trapping Elena in a past that would never return, and she, was starting to realize it. One afternoon they were walking along a dirt road near the town. The sky was gray, and the silence between them weighed more than any conversation could alleviate, until Nikolai stopped, looked at her with teary eyes and said, "Do you still love me?" She hesitated for a second, surprised by the question. Then he responded in a firm voice, "Yes, more than ever." He lowered his eyes. He took a deep breath, and then he said, "And yet, I feel like I'm taking you with me to a place where you shouldn't be. I'm back, Elena, but I'm no longer the man you loved. You still see me, but I no longer recognize myself, and I don't want what's left of me to destroy what's left of you." It was like a blow, but at the same time he understood it. He understood that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. She understood that he was not giving up on her, but was trying to save her. That, at that moment, he didn't need a relationship, he needed healing, and she, needed peace. They walked in silence to the house. They had dinner together as if nothing had been said. They slept in the same bed, back to back, listening only to the sound of their own hearts trying to accept what had already been decided. The next day, Nikolai packed his small suitcase. He said he would live with an old friend, in a remote house, where he could work with wood and try to find some meaning in his new life. Elena did not object. He simply nodded with teary eyes. There was no fight. There was no drama. Just two hearts that, exhausted, understood that they no longer knew how to love each other in the present, that they carried between them a past so enormous that there was no longer room for the future. When he left, there was no hug, just one last look, long, intense, full of everything they couldn't say out loud. Elena stood at the door for a long time after he left. The wind rustled the curtains, and the ring he still wore seemed heavier than ever. That day he didn't take it off, not the next one, not in the next few months, because, despite the goodbye, love remained there, no longer as a presence, but as an absence, like memory, like a letter that never arrived. A few days later he received an envelope. It was from Nikolai, and he said, "There was never a moment when I stopped loving you, but I needed to leave so I wouldn't take you with me to where I still need to go alone. Thank you for waiting for me. for loving me, for supporting me when I couldn't even. If one day I return to you, let it be completely. And if I don't come back, you should know that I loved you with everything I could be." Elena read the letter like someone reading a will, and for the first time he didn't respond. He kept it with all the others. And, in that gesture, he understood that some love stories do not end with kisses, but with silence, with courage, with the pain of knowing that love does not end, but you still have to leave it, a goodbye without a hug, a love that did not die, but that needed to be buried, to continue existing in peace. Life has that strange ability to continue, even when everything within us seems to have stopped. The days continue, the seasons change, people come in, others leave, and, with time, we learn to smile again. But there is always a corner of the heart where the longing lives silently, untouched. It was exactly like that with Elena. After Nikolai left, she didn't let the pain consume her. He continued in the bookstore, serving customers, recommending stories as always. Some mornings were harder than others, but over time he learned to put a smile on his face even when his soul felt heavy, as if smiling was also a form of resistance, a silent way of keeping alive the part of her she still loved. He rearranged the furniture in the house, changed some curtains, painted one of the walls a lighter tone, small gestures that symbolized a new beginning. But he never touched the mailbox. It was still stored in the same place, wrapped in a blue scarf, as if time had frozen inside it. The years passed slowly. The city has changed. The children grew up. The stores closed. New neighbors arrived. Elena aged gracefully, but her eyes always had that sad shine of someone who once lived a love that time could not erase. Sometimes people asked her if she had been married, if she had children. She smiled and responded with a simple, "He had a story," and it was enough. Nikolai never returned. She received one last letter from him, a few months after their separation. He said he was fine, that he had found a quiet place to live, and that he was learning to find beauty in simple things, in the smell of cut wood, in the sound of the wind passing through the trees. But there was a parting tone, not explicit, but present. "Elena, when I think of you, I still feel peace, I still feel love. But now, this love lives in silence, like a flame that burns softly, without attracting attention. Thank you for being my refuge." With eternal tenderness, Nicholas, she never responded, not because I didn't want to, but because I felt that this was the last page of a story that no longer needed to be written. And yet, that story never ceased to exist within her. It was part of who she was, and it continued to be so. Over the years, many have tried to get closer. There were suitors, invitations to dance, small gestures of affection, but Elena never gave in again. Not out of bitterness or fear, but because I knew I would never feel that way again. The kind of love she experienced with Nikolai is not repeated twice, and he preferred to have his memory intact than to live something half-lived. On rainy afternoons, he sometimes sat on the porch with a book in his lap, and his gaze lost on the landscape. In those moments, I spoke to him in my thoughts. I imagined the sound of his voice, the feel of his hands, the way he said your name, and smile. Because, despite the longing, that love no longer hurt him. It was like a beautiful scar, a reminder that, one day, he experienced something real, and, in fact, he lived. A love without a happy ending, but with enough truth to last decades. A love that, even interrupted, continued to exist in the form of a memory. And that, in some way, supported her. Because he knew that he had loved with everything, that there was nothing left to say, that everything he felt was given to him, word by word, letter by letter. On special nights, Elena still reread the letters. He sat quietly, played soft music, and opened the box like someone visiting a lost time. I ran my fingers over the pages, smelled the aged paper, read the words with the same excitement. As when I first received them, sometimes I cried, others smiled, but I was always grateful. Thank you for being my home, even from afar. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't have to last to be eternal. The longing never went away, but it also didn't stop Elena from continuing to live. She found joy in the little things, in the flowers in the garden, in the stories in books, in the letters she wrote but never sent. She was a woman made of silence and tenderness, of love lived and kept, and that was enough for him. When someone asked her why she never married, she simply said, "Because my heart still belongs to someone who one day wrote me the most beautiful love I have ever read. In a world where almost everything is lost over time, forgotten faces, names that fade, feelings that weaken, there was something that Elena never allowed to fade. Letters. Those small rectangles of paper, written with ordinary ink, contained something extraordinary. More than words, they carried pieces of a life, fragments of a love that, although interrupted, never stopped beating within her. All the letters were kept in a simple wooden box, with delicate engravings on the lid, a gift from his father when he was still young. They were at the back of the closet, wrapped in a faded light blue scarf, the same one she wore in her hair the day Nikolai went to war. A detail that no one else would notice, but that, for her, was a symbol of everything they experienced. Inside were more 60 letters, some short, others several pages long. Some are wrinkled with age, with old tear stains, others still have traces of dirt and dust from the battlefields, and all, without exception, written with a tenderness that time has never managed to erase. Elena reread the letters at very specific moments, never by chance. It was almost a sacred ritual. On birthdays, stormy nights, days when the longing was stronger, she sat alone, made a cup of tea, chose a card at random, and let herself drift into the past. Every word read was like hearing his voice again. It was like feeling your heart race as if you were still in your 20s. The first letter was the yellowest, brief, hastily written in training camp, just a few weeks after he left. Nikolai was still the hopeful young man who believed he would return in a few months. He wrote lightly, even in the midst of uncertainty. He said he missed the smell of the bookstore, the sound of her laughter among the aisles of books, and the way he held her hand without saying a word. Elena, I still hear your voice in the midst of the loudest silence. Here, between gears and instructions, it is you who calms me down. Wait for me, please wait for me. The last letter, kept with a ribbon that separated it from the others, was the one that moved her the most. Not because it contains a farewell, but because it expresses the serene acceptance of everything experienced. It was the letter that Nikolai wrote after the separation. There were no longer expectations of a reunion, but there was love, a lot of love. If this is the last time I write, know that I regret nothing. Our love was not complete in time, but it was complete in the soul. You taught me to feel, Elena. Love, even among ruins. Thank you for giving me more than the world could take from me. Elena kept these letters not like someone who collects memories, but like someone who keeps a reliquary. I knew there was more to them than a simple story of war and romance. There was testimony of resistance, of humanity, of emotional depth. Those roles were, for her, proof that true love does not depend on time, presence, or fulfillment. You just have to live it sincerely. Over the years, many people have suggested that he publish them, transform that intimate collection into a book, a memorial, something that can inspire others, but she always doubted. I felt like those words were only his, a private world that belonged to the silence they kept together. However, once, speaking with a young woman from the city, a literature student, who admired Elena for her sensitivity towards books, he shared part of the story with her. He read extracts, described contexts, showed one or two letters, and the young woman, with teary eyes, said, "This is an inheritance, not of goods, but of humanity, a legacy of love. People need to read this." Elena did not respond at that time, but as he went to bed that night, he thought about how much those letters had sustained his soul for decades, and he also thought that perhaps the time had come to let them fly beyond his walls, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude, for recognition, because the love that didn't end deserved to be known, if only to remind the world that it existed. The preserved letters were much more than memories. They were a part of the war that won the war. They were what was left when everything was lost. They were the ones who kept alive the certainty that, at some point in time, two hearts beat together, even separated by distances, silences, and goodbyes, and that, ... was eternal. Time is a subtle artist. He paints wrinkles where there was once smooth skin, transforms silences into memories and covers stories with a veil of longing that only those who lived know how to decipher. Elena has aged gracefully, but with a soft weight in her eyes, a constant glow of someone who carries something precious inside her, something that no longer belongs to the present, but refuses to go away. And it was like this, with this serene and discreet spirit, that he lived until the end of his days. That autumn morning, like so many others, Elena woke up early. He made his tea, walked to the living room window, and watched the leaves fall in the garden. The fall colors seemed more intense that day, as if they knew something quiet and sacred was about to happen. He grabbed paper and pencil and sat at his desk. He wrote calmly, as he did in his youth, while waiting for news from Nikolai. But this time the words were not for him. They were in he, a kind of letter to time, for life, for the love that endured, even when everything else had faded. But when he finished, something in his expression changed. Elena seemed uneasy. He opened the closet, took out the old box of letters, took a deep breath and, for the first time in decades, took out a new envelope and wrote with hands that no longer had the firmness of youth. It was a new letter, and it was for him. Nikolai taught me that love doesn't need a happy ending to be eternal. Today, after so many years, I still feel you with me. In every smell of old paper, in every silence of the early morning. I never loved again. I never wanted it again. Because you were enough. I don't know if this letter will go anywhere. Maybe just with the wind, maybe to heaven. But I needed to write, like I always did, because that's how I talk to you. I'm tired, my love, but not sad, just done. And if there is somewhere, beyond this world, I hope you wait for me with that same look in your eyes as the day you went to war. I love you, forever, Elena. She didn't close the envelope. He simply placed it on his chest, lay down on the couch, wrapped himself in his blue blanket, same one from all those years ago, and closed his eyes. There was peace in his expression, as if that letter had been the last link, the last not undone, the last breath of a soul that had truly loved. That's how they found her, hours later, serenely asleep, and in the fingers, intertwined, the last letter, never delivered, never shipped. The news spread through the city with the sad sweetness of a whisper. The lady of letters is gone, they said. Some cried, others simply smiled respectfully. He was a well-known and admired figure, a woman who loved without scandal, lived with dignity, and went out with the same delicacy with which she had gone through life. At the funeral, someone mentioned the box of letters, and with the consent of her only distant relative, a young literature student who had cared for Elena in recent years, the letters were preserved, catalogued and respected as the treasures they were. But no one knew about the last letter. She was found days later, while organizing her belongings. The young caregiver opened the envelope with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. When you read it, you understood everything. The story, the weight, the love. And he decided that the letter was never delivered, should not be kept like the others. It would be the first page of a book, the starting point of a story that deserved to be told to the world. The letter that Elena never sent was finally read by other hearts, and, in a way, it was given, not to Nikolai, but to everyone who ever loved without response, whoever waited without knowing, whoever wrote without response. She touched generations. It inspired letters, movies, poems, songs, and, more than anything, it showed that words, when written with love, do not need a fixed destination. They always get to where they need to be. Elena left with the sweetness of someone who experienced something true, and his last letter was the last breath of a love that never needed presence to be immortal. Some stories don't end. They echo. They may even find a final point in the pages of life, but they continue to live between the lines, in the silences, in the gestures that remain long after writing the last letter. The story of Elena and Nikolai is one of those, a story that did not need the traditional happy ending to be eternal, because what they experienced surpassed the logic of time and circumstances. It was a love that found, in words, its purest form of existence. They were separated by war, separated by geography, and, later, by the weight of what life imposed on them. But still, they stayed together, in thought, in memory, on paper. Each written letter was like a candle lit in the darkness. Small, yes, but strong, and, together, they illuminated a path that neither distance, nor silence, nor time could erase. It's easy to think that love is only worth it when it ends with a reunion, with a happily ever after. But what about the loves that shape a soul, that sustain an entire life, even without a soap opera ending? And the loves that teach us to wait, to feel, to write. Do you love that? Even if they don't last in presence, they last in essence. What Elena and Nikolai experienced was this, a love That lived in letters, that developed between the pages, that became words, that endured because it was written. Every wait for me, every I still love you. Every inky silence was a declaration that they were together, even if the world didn't allow them to live it the traditional way. And this is perhaps the greatest legacy of its history, proving that love does not need to fit into a mold. It does not have to be visible, nor everyday, nor easy. Love can be memory. It could be absence. It could be nostalgia. It could be a name whispered before bed, or a letter kept for decades. To love, as they loved, is to have courage. Courage to feel, even without guarantees. Wait, even without promises. Keep writing, even when answers take time or don't come. Courage to love someone, not for what they can offer, but for who they are. And keep that love alive, even when everything around us seems to want to erase it. Elena moved on with her life, but she never moved on without him. He, in turn, left, but left part of himself in every envelope, in every line drawn in haste or pain. Together, they created a story that belongs to the rarest kind of narrative, one that doesn't need witnesses to be real, because it was real where it matters most, inside. And perhaps that is the true miracle of love. It can survive in words. Words are fragile. It's true. They can be destroyed, forgotten, lost. But when they are born from the depths of the soul, they become indestructible. They span generations and transform those who read them, those who write them, those who simply hear about them. So it was with Elena and Nikolai's letters. Today, anyone reading this story may not even know the exact details of what happened between them. Maybe you don't know the color of Elena's eyes or the sound of Nikolai's voice, but feel the weight of absence, the strength of waiting, the warmth of words exchanged with so much affection. Feel the love, and that's enough, because in the end, what's left? The house ages, the body too, the seasons repeat, but words ... words live. They are the refuge of feelings that time has not managed to bury. They are the records of everything that we cannot say out loud, but that screams inside us. It is the maps that transport us to the most precious memories, and sometimes they are the only form of eternity we can achieve. Therefore, the story of Elena and Nikolai is not over. It continues every time someone finds an old letter in a forgotten box, every time a song talks about lost love, every time someone writes for someone who no longer knows how to read, every time a heart feels longing, and, even so, it is grateful for having loved, because their love, although separated by war, lived forever on paper. And now he also lives in us. If this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you of someone, a letter, a silence, then share it with the world. What you feel now is exactly what moves me to continue creating stories like this. True, human, deep. Your support, through a like, a comment, or a channel subscription, is what allows these narratives to continue to exist. And if a story could transform your day, imagine what we can transform together.